Welcome to Watch World with Faye, a new podcast in the watch and lifestyle space. I'm your host, Faye Soteri. I've been in the industry for over 20 years and I've been lucky enough to work with the people behind the brands, from some incredible independents and micro brands to the Goliaths. One thing that I've noticed as a common theme is every brand has its own unique story. Join me in meeting with these people as we bring these stories to life. Welcome to Watch World Pod. I am Faye Soteri, and today I'm joined with Mark Tolson. Mark Tolson is former global head of watch buying for Watches of Switzerland. He's also worked with massive independents across the UK and global brands such as Theo Furnell. What this man has forgotten about watches, most people in their lifetime will never even have the opportunity to learn. So I'm incredibly grateful that Mark is joining me today and hopefully on future episodes for us to talk about watches and all of the things that he enjoys and makes us both tick. Hi Mark, how are you?
Hi Faye, thank you. That's a bit of a build up. Let's hope I don't make any errors then. But nice to see you.
It's lovely to see you. We have met before though, haven't we?
For about 15 years, yes, yeah. We've known each other for about 15, I don't know, 15 or so years. So quite a long time. It's surprising how we both look so young. But there you go. That's one of those things.
Couldn't agree with you more. Thanks for joining me. I'm really grateful for this. Over the years when I've worked for you, we've had, largely all of our conversations have either been about fish and chips, but largely about watches and the industry. So I'm really pleased that you're able to join me today and for us to continue those conversations. So I thought perhaps what we could do is do a brief review of 2024 in terms of products, what's interested you, what excited you, and then talk about what we can expect from 2025. There's a few other things that we'll probably discuss along the way, but what for you was important about 2024?
I mean, I think the watch calendar always kicks off with a fair, and so I guess the main fair of the year for me was Watches and Wonders in April 24, and I mean we were both there. It was a little bit downbeat, I think. I mean, some of the brands were holding back product. I mean, I think Rolex is a good example of that. They only introduced one steel watch, the GMT, with the black and grey bezel. Is that called the Bruce Wayne or something these days? That was their only steel watch, and the rest were kind of day-date mods. And obviously there was a couple of 18-carat pieces, which we'll probably discuss later. But I think they were holding back a little bit, waiting for a more buoyant market. And I think obviously their sister brand Tudor was also a little bit subdued with their releases. Obviously they released more things as the year progressed, but it was generally I think a bit of a downbeat fair. But I mean, there were some product highlights, and we're not really talking commercial and business from a product perspective. I think probably some of my favourites from last year were from Tag Heuer, which I do love Tag Heuer. I think sometimes they come in for a bit of unnecessary stick, but the 39mm Carrera green dial, the Dato, a sort of homage to the 1964 model that they introduced with a chronograph at 3:00 and the date at 9:00. 1964 is a significant year because it's 60, and that's how old I am. But that glass box dial 39mm case, that was great for about £6,000. A really, really cool watch. And coming back to actually Tudor at Watches and Wonders, I guess the 39mm GMT Black Bay with the Coke bezel, the red and the black bezel that we'd all been waiting for Rolex to produce. Well, Tudor kind of did it, so that was great. And then I think later in the year, Tudor brought out the Pelagos FXD GMT with the tie into the French Navy, which again I think it's about £4,000. That watch, really, really, really great product. I mean, Tudor do continue to launch some wonderful things. I think Zenith were interesting as well with the Defy revival, the 1969 divers watch that recreated in 37mm. I think that was about under £7,000. And I think that was Zenith attempting to diversify a little bit away from the El Primero, the chronograph type of things by producing that diver's watch from their back catalogue. So that was very cool as well. I don't know. I think probably one of my favourite watches was the Omega Speedmaster. I can't remember when it was launched last year, but obviously Omega always do lots of different things with the Speedmaster. I think recently was the first watch in first Omega in space with that blue dial Speedmaster they've created. But I think my favourite was the Speedmaster with a white dial, the glossy white dial. Yeah, I mean that was really, really lovely. £7,600, and I mean that design, that iconic Speedmaster design, first watch on the moon. We all know it with a black dial, and to completely flip it into a white dial and for it to still look amazing, I think that was great. Testament to the iconic design, and I absolutely love that watch. I think it was one of the hits, at least from my opinion, of 2024.
They've just released some teasers as well about a Speedmaster that's just. They've just released a teaser, haven't they? That the Speedmasters that's due. So that'll be exciting to see. Obviously, they won't hit the market for several years, because one of the biggest challenges with Omega is the production and how quickly they can get to market. But the white dial was incredibly successful, and I think everybody felt positive about it. Watches can be really polarizing. However, this was one of those that everyone was really engaged with, and it was just sort of a bravo to Omega. Well, there's only a couple of brands there that we've covered off from last year, and obviously there was a lot more product launched. The one thing I would say about Tag was interesting. I'm also a fan. My only disappointment was how they are managing the Monaco lines now, and they seem to be limited availability or limited production. So I understand what they're trying to do in terms of sort of raising awareness and demand perhaps on some of those, but some of their Monacos are absolutely incredible. I've always liked them actually, and it's never been their most popular within the collections. However, some of what they continue to do with that is I'm always impressed. I'm always really excited to see. So that's a very brief nod to and touch on some of the pieces from 2024. You were really heavily involved with the centenary pieces at Watches of Switzerland. I'm quite keen, as we look at 25, there are quite a few anniversary years from the brands this year. Well, there are sort of every year, but there's some key ones this year. So I want to talk to you a little bit about anniversaries, how important they are to the brands, what you think might happen. Are they always important, or is it a marketing piece? And what relevance they are to commercially. But you've had some real involvement in product creation on the centenary pieces. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Firstly, do you enjoy the process? Because it's got to be a lot of kudos to be part of a design element and seeing your concepts, how you work with the brands and how they then hit the shop floor.
Yeah, I left Watches of Switzerland in January 24, and 2024 was the 100th anniversary of Watches of Switzerland. So that company started in 1924 in Ludgate Hill. So in around 2022, 23, we started talking to brands about producing some centenary limited edition product to celebrate that 100th anniversary. And we did things with Cartier and Gerard Perregaux, Tag Heuer, Ulysse Nardin, etc. And I mean, as a process, I think it's different when you go to them as a retailer looking for an exclusive, because all retailers, particularly big retailers, want something different. They want a point of difference from the other retailers they're competing against. But obviously, brands have their production plans, and they know maybe years in advance what they're going to produce. So you don't necessarily have the opportunity to muck things up for them in the way you'd like. So some of the things I wanted to do for the was centenary. For example, I think with Gerard Perregaux, I wanted to recreate one of their early quartz watches because it was significant. And I think with with some of the other brands, again, I wanted to do something different or something that references their back catalogue. So, for example, Zenith, one of their watches, one of their chronos had something called a lobster bracelet, and I wanted to create that. But actually, what you end up with in most cases is a production piece with a different coloured dial in it and some engraving on the back, which is fine, and it has its place, and it's commercial. And for example, with Watches of Switzerland, some of them were beautiful, like the Cartier yellow gold tank was amazing, and the Gerard Perregaux looks good with a gold dial. So they're all good, but I mean, they're big manufacturers, and as I say, they have their own agenda, which they may be inflexible on. I don't mean inflexible in a bad way, but they've got certain aims, and Watches of Switzerland had certain aims, so maybe the two don't mesh. I mean, the one that was the most exciting and the most sort of raw in terms of how much he could influence was working with Struthers. So that's the Midlands-based husband and wife duo, Rebecca and Craig Struthers, who maybe manufacture a handful of watches a year. And we worked with them to produce just a one-off piece. It was a yellow gold Kingsley case watch with a full calendar, and even got into the detail of using the old GM Lane, which was the sort of parent company of Watches of Switzerland, their logo, their lettering from the 1920s, to recreate the Watches of Switzerland name on the dial in the original typeface. So that was quite good being involved in all of those. I mean, sadly, I decided to leave before a lot of this work was completed, but that was kind of the journey we were on. And it is exciting. It does feel like you've, even in a small way, even if it's just a dial colour, you do feel a sort of sense of achievement that you've, managed to influence brand X and they've done a different coloured dial, and you get quite excited about that.
So it sounds like it's a slightly more diluted approach with the bigger brands and the slightly more established in terms of the creative process versus Struthers, where your suggestions working with them, they came to fruition they were much more agreeable to what your suggestions were and working with them versus sort of a Goliath and some of these huge watch houses.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you're never going to really easily pull off an exclusive with Rolex because they don't need you in the way that perhaps a smaller brand might need you.
Okay, so with the anniversary, it was obviously really important to Watches of Switzerland. Any retailer has got, yes, regardless of whether it's watches or any sort of luxury, with any luxury background, they sort of celebrate these important dates. This year, for the watch brands, we've got Panerai, which is 165 years, Zenith 160, Blancpain 290, Breguet 250. So some really significant. There's some mileage on those years, on those brands. Yep. Chopard's another one at 165. Audemars at 150, and the baby of the group, MB&F, which is only 20. So I like that being that. Well, I like the fact that we're able to talk about that within the realms of anniversaries, because it's quite difficult for a watch brand to break into the market to the capacity that MB&F have done. There are a lot of independent brands, and that'll be a whole other episode because it fascinates me, and the culture of it, how that area is growing. It's not part of the anniversary conversation, but it's great to see that there's going to be a significant anniversary for MB&F. Firstly, the first question here is your thoughts on how important are anniversary years to watch brands?
I think they are important, but there are lots of spurious ones. I mean, you can get into the numbers. Is 25 more significant than 30? Is 90 not as important as 100? I mean, I'm a little bit like, well, 25, 50, 75, 100. Those kind of steps are significant. So, I mean, you mentioned Vacheron at 270, Blancpain at the oldest watch brand at 290. I mean, they're really old, but they're not 300 and they're not 250. Of those two, if you had Breguet at 250, that seems more important to me because it's 250, and I know that's just a number, but I mean, obviously Breguet's significance to watches is huge. So you would hope that Breguet would do something epic in 2025 to celebrate that 250-year milestone, which is quite significant. I think they're
Do you think
they're
do you think
great.
it supports on their marketing?
I mean, they tend to be quite subdued in their marketing. I mean, a couple of years back when it was the anniversary of the Tourbillon, I think it wasn't the most noticeable thing in the market that, Breguet invented the Tourbillon and they're still making them today. It kind of almost passed by unnoticed, which I think is a shame. So I hope they do better with the 250th anniversary of the brand.
Yeah, a quarter of a century is defining, isn't it? And and Abraham Louis Breguet was so significant in the history of watchmaking. So hopefully there will be something that's released that celebrates that. So do you think, have you got any predictions over those anniversaries, or otherwise I want to know what you think we are likely to see come the watch fairs in the spring this year?
Well, that is crystal ball gazing, isn't it? I mean, one you didn't mention, Rolex is 120 years old, and again, that's not 125 and it's not 100. But I don't think, if I don't recall 20 years ago, Rolex doing anything particularly to say we are 100 years old. But within Rolex, the GMT was launched in 1955, so that makes it 70 years old this year. So, I mean, there may be something there, in the way maybe they do an 18-carat model with a sapphire crystal back, like they did with the Le Mans to celebrate the GMT, yep. Maybe, yeah, or even do the steel GMT with the Coke bezel, the black and red that, as I say, Tudor did, and everybody's been asking for from Rolex for a number of years. So, there may be something. There may be something there. I think Omega may do something. They always like to do something around Bond, and it's 30 years of the Bond partnership this year. So the first film, I think, with Pierce Brosnan was GoldenEye. I think, it's GoldenEye. And
they usually do that on a Bond year, though. And there's nothing to be scheduled this year for a film, so it'll be interesting to see whether they do a small celebration to recognise the heritage of it. But there isn't. They're normally brought out the same year as the film.
Well, I mean that goes to the nub of your question: are they significant for brands, or are they just some grubby commercial tool to drive sales? Well, okay, so there isn't a Bond film, but it is 30 years of Bond. So will they do something? I think the way the Bond watches sell, I think there's enough in there for them to do something nice and interesting for an Omega fan and a Bond fan to unite those two together and it not be a kind of grubby commercial activity. Although I like grubby commercial activities as a personal thing.
Don't we all? It gives us something to talk about, and we've talked about it before. It's coined a Bond year, isn't it? When there is a film that's due out and the sales, there's a halo effect on the entire brand. It's not just the watch that might be launched aligned with the film, but it is incredible about how there's a spike and commercial interest in those when it happens.
But also, whilst there's no film, there is no Bond either. So Daniel Craig has stopped. I mean, imagine this year if they say Mark Tolson is up for the new Bond, and here's celebrating the 30-year partnership. That would be a story. Whoever, if they announce whoever the new James Bond is, and Omega piggyback on the back of that, saying here's the Bond partnership that Omega have had for 30 years. That's a story, isn't it?
Is this? Have you just told us that you're the new James Bond? Is that what you're telling us?
Well, I can't really say. I think it's very unlikely.
I couldn't possibly say.
I think it's
stranger
very
things
unlikely.
have happened. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you heard it here first. I'm intrigued now. Can't wait for those teasers on Instagram. Okay, great. So do you have any other predictions about the fair? I mean, what we didn't talk about, which was a key launch for Patek last year. I want you to introduce this watch because you've got some interesting thoughts about it. So, and because it wasn't launched at the fair, they've more recently started introducing product throughout the year and not just waiting for Watches and Wonders or formerly Basel World. What did you think about the Patek launch at the end of the year?
Yeah, it was October, and I mean, it was almost universally slagged off by everybody, which I think is a little bit unfair. So we're talking about the Cubitus. And interestingly, the Cubitus is the bone in your forearm that runs from your wrist to your elbow. And most of the people who wrote about the watch certainly gave the impression they'd like to give the watch the elbow. They didn't like the shape, they didn't like the size, they didn't like anything about it seemingly. And I think it was Patek's first new launch in 25 years. And it was a bit of a weird launch, and it was kind of leaked out in the press in an advert before it was officially announced, and nobody knew whether it was a mistake. Nobody knew whether it was some sort of Frankenstein watch that somebody had knocked up on PowerPoint in the bedroom and put it out there. So it was a little bit weird. I mean, it's 45 mil. I mean, there's three metals:
Big
steel,
watch.
bicolor, and platinum. Yeah, but it's square, isn't it? And so the normal rules of 45 mil being a big round case maybe don't necessarily apply. I mean, I saw it when it came in to where I was working, and it's very slim. It's 8.3 mil. It's too big for my wrist, but then I've got quite a small wrist. I think my only criticism really is that it's a bit pricey. It's sort of £35,330, which is about 11,000 more than an Aquanaut on a bracelet. It's got the same movement. Obviously, the case isn't quite as complex, but 11K for the case seems quite a lot. And I think some of the spec these days is maybe not that great. It's 30 meters water resistant, and it's about 35 to 45 hours power reserve. And if you look at a 41 mil Royal Oak, that's 50 meters. And admittedly, Royal Oaks and Nautiluses and probably Cubitus never really see any water, so the water resistance is a little bit of a blind alley. But the power reserve is 70 hours on a Royal Oak, and it's about 11K cheaper than a Cubitus. So for a similar watch, steel integrated bracelet watch, a 3-hand date. So I think it's had a mixed reception. Is it going to sell? Absolutely. Is it appearing on the secondary market already, which is terrible? But it's going for more money than the retail price. So, is it a success? Yeah, it's a Patek.
By definition, yes.
Yeah, it's a Patek. I mean, the quality's beautiful. The dials are great. Just an interesting direction that they've taken.
Based on your point, it being the first new collection that they've brought out in a long time, and their production quantities being so low, do you think these are going to be added? They've opened up their production to create this, or is it going to affect other models within the collection that's already incredibly difficult to purchase?
Well, the steel Nautilus, the 5711, was discontinued a couple of years back. So, I mean, that may have given some production room, perhaps. I don't know. There are only, I think there are only 2 steel Nautilus models in the collection. So I don't know. I mean, Pateks are always going to be difficult to get, particularly the hot models like the Nautilus and some of the perpetual calendars, etc., and the high complications. But I also wonder what the Cubitus launch does to the brand as far as 2026 is concerned, because that's the 50th anniversary of the Nautilus. Will they do something to the Nautilus? Will they resurrect the steel Nautilus? Maybe not. Now they've done a steel Cubitus. I don't know, but That's an interesting thing about what will happen in 2026 with the 50th anniversary of the Nautilus, based on the Cubitus's arrival this year.
Yeah,
Last year.
it's a good point. So we don't think that they've necessarily discontinued one to maintain the bandwidth for a new collection. I mean, Patek would be, I'm going to say, crazy to not reintroduce it at the 50th anniversary. It's a perfect storm, isn't it, for a relaunch? And instead of what some brands do is just phase it out the year before, that would have been 3 years then. So sufficient time, production time, development. There'll be new models, slightly new design, but obviously I would imagine they'll be loyal to that. Let's pick up on this one in next year and see if your forecast is correct.
I've been
what
wrong
about other
20
brands?
times.
Do you think there's going to be anything significant that's going to be at the fairs? I never get this game right anyway, for all the years we've worked together, and I admit to my inadequacies as a former watch buyer, and how much I enjoy horology. I'm asked the question every year. I never get it right, so I can't play this game with any authority. So that's why I'm asking you.
Yeah, I think I'm going to swerve it as well, because again, it's really difficult. I mean, there are a few things. That, well, as a general level, there are a few things we could consider. I mean, you mentioned MB&F being 20 years old, which is young in the pantheon of watchmakers, but the early 2000s, late 1990s. I mean, there was an upsurge in independent brands that have managed to survive and continue. Grubel Forsey launched in 2004, and I think FP Journe 1999, and I say MB&F in 2005. So independents, I think, are a bit of a force, and I think 20th anniversary of MB&F, there's bound to be something. There's got to be something that they're going to do, because I don't think Max would miss an opportunity like that. And I mean, that could be a real celebration. But I think thematically, without getting too far into products, I think I wonder, the whole steel integrated sports watch trend that we've all worked through for the last 20 years or so. I wonder if the industry will take the opportunity to look at something a little bit different and maybe move towards understated, classic, dressy type watches. And understated might be quite important. We're in a weird time economically. I know I don't want to talk about negative things, but there were a lot of thefts of obvious watches that people recognize, like certain Rolex, certain Patek, etc. But it was the obvious ones. I don't necessarily think you would. You hear many people getting their watches stolen on something that's a clean-looking 18-karat dressy type watch from, I don't know, Patek or Rolex, Patek or Cartier. So I that might be an interesting change and a different avenue for brands to pursue. And you look at the vintage watch market, there are some great things out there. And whilst I think the secondary market is a little bit depressed, as in the primary market is as well, there are some beautiful dressy type watches out there. And maybe the brands should look at their back catalogue and do things with some of that more classic stuff.
Well, they always do a heritage piece anyway, and we've just seen that they've launched the 222 in steel, sadly with a blue dial, which automatically means it's boutique only, so it won't be readily available. But they've always every year they do something to do with their historic collection, so that made sense, and there'd been a lot of demand and request for it, so it's really good that the brands. Well, they might have had it in production anyway and just launched the gold piece 2 years ago. And perhaps it was always in their production line in the pipeline to bring it out, but that will create a lot of interest. And it speaks to the vintage, the vintage trend as well, which we have seen grow quite a lot over the years. It's been a healthy and steady growth. It's not just been a new trend that's come out and everyone's wearing something that looks old or is a vintage piece. But I think also there's, sadly, like you referenced, it can be a difficult time to celebrate your watches. We've had that conversation many a time, just working in central London. It's, cover your wrists up in the summer type thing. We know we've heard too much about it, and again, I don't want to lean on that point too much, because it's just a shame, and it leaves a bad taste in the mouth from anybody in the industry, whether you're a retailer, whether you're a brand, and most importantly, if you're a collector. It's just hard-earned cash where people are just too nervous. And I think actually that's an episode in itself, how people are responding to it, what they're wearing instead of. And in a way, the one thing I do think that's coming from that is some of these independent brands at a slightly lower price point, people are beginning to buy into those brands a little bit more because they feel less threat. And it's not that there's the love that's gone away from some of the bigger brands, or those that are almost slightly more identifiable as that high demand piece. But it's potentially, that's the silver lining of what's happening in the market. And it's not just in the UK, it happens, Spain's terrible for it. There's a few places that you probably feel quite safe wearing a Audemars Rolex or a Patek. But at the moment, sadly, there's just caution, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I didn't think this was going to be part of the narrative of being a watch collector or a buyer. You don't have to be a collector, because it's such a violation whether it's one watch or all of your watches. And I know a lot of people that have copies in their safes. Should anything happen, it's the copies that are taken, and then their original pieces are not on site anywhere. They're safety deposit boxes, and it's just another level of security and another level of thought to go behind it, which is a real shame, because you and I have always loved watches, and they should be celebrated, not feared, as far as I'm concerned. So trends, I think we're going to see some more pink. Miss Piggy was launched recently, and I did call that 2 years ago when we saw Oris's Kermit. You can't be angry with Kermit. I remember that I saw the press launch before I saw the watch, and everyone was just really excited, and I was thrilled for the brand, because sometimes some of these collaborations or associations can be considered quite gimmicky. However, what Oris did with Kermit was just brilliant. It caused a frenzy. It has a halo effect. It raises the profile of the brand, if nothing else. And they're really big on other areas as well, so sustainability. So I loved what they did, and just I remember at the appointment saying, "I can't wait to see the Miss Piggy." And lo and behold, we've just seen that being launched. The Pantone for me doesn't quite match the Muppet itself, but I'm not part of the design team, but it's still going to work, and I'm really pleased that they've continued with that partnership.
Yeah, definitely.
Other trends, so pink won't be strong in it with every brand, but equally what it is really nice is just to see that injection of color to sort of raise the even just the case line when you're visually looking at a watch. If you're enjoying the customer journey, looking to see, because it's very different where people do their research online largely and then go into store to purchase. I think especially with color, it can't give the right representation. So I think, Tag did it with the Carrera when they did the 36 mils 2 years ago. Oddly, that when they did some very traditional colors, there was six pieces launched in that with the blue and the black obviously being prominent. They did a vibrant pink. And I think it's really important that these brands sort of play with some color, don't take it too seriously, and don't make assumptions that people only want to wear a black dial or a blue dial or a white dial, and then some variations and shades thereof in between. So some brands play with color really well, but I quite like it when someone's being bold.
Yeah, true. Yeah. I wonder also on the dial theme, about stone dials, natural material. I mean, that's always been part of Rolex's armory, lapis dials, meteorite dials, etc., fossil dials going back a bit. If you look at the prices of the second-hand day dates or pre-owned day dates with those sort of dials, they're really quite high. So as we know, sort of stone dials, natural dials make a watch unique because obviously the material is unique. And you mentioned about smaller brands like Baltic did some last year, I think, with meteorite dials, and Nevada Grenchen, their F77. They had a variety of stone dials in them, so relatively inexpensive watches, but with that unique angle of a natural material dial. Again, it is something. Maybe that's a trend that will expand this year. And also, coming back actually a little way to the Cubitus, interesting case shapes. So AP's Remaster 02 was that kind of asymmetrical, quite brutal looking rectangular watch with a blue dial, lots of sharp angles. But it was a different. I think it was a remake of something they did in the 1960s, the 5159 or something. So that was a shock to the eyes when all we really see are round watches for most of the time. And then you had Brenneron's curvy Mirage watch, which were a little bit along the lines of the Cartier Crash watch, but a little bit more subtle, but a lovely curvy case. So interesting case shapes that aren't round might be a something, maybe a something, possibly.
Okay. And to your point on the meteorite dials, from the teaser Amiga has just dropped on the Speedmaster, that looks like it's a meteorite dial.
Yep.
From
it does,
what I gather. So exciting for horologists and geologists all around the world.
Exactly that. Yeah. I think, and I hope I've got this right for late in 2025. My apologies if I haven't, but I think the thing I'm probably most looking forward to is the relaunch of Universal Genève, which I think is going to be great. So that's for those of people not aware. I mean, it's a great brand that hasn't really existed much over recent times. It's been resurrected by George Kern and the Breitling team, and I think in September last year, they showed the 70th anniversary of the Pole Routers. The Pole Routers were one of George Genta's first designs. It's a classic-looking watch. It's great. It sells well on the secondary market, and it was a faithful recreation of the 1954 Genta design. And it looked beautiful. And the bracelet, if you go on Instagram, you can see the guy making the bracelet. The bracelet's something to behold. So I think Universal Genève's return, hopefully at the end of this year. Hopefully it's not 26, otherwise we can do this again next year. But Universal Genève had some great history. They were, I think, the world's slimmest automatic in the 1960s. I think it was 2.5 mil thick. They also did the world's slimmest quartz watch in 1975 called the Golden Shadow. I think the first chronograph watch with an hour totalizer as far back as 1936. So they've got the rich history that all watch nerds love. And I think with Breitling's or George Kern's marketing nous and product savviness, if there is such a word, I think that could be a real event for later in 2025. And I think certain brands.
Who do you think they're going to compete with? Will it cannibalise sales from Breitling, or is it because it's a very different look? Will it? Who do you think is their direct market, and which other brands are going to be mostly affected by this? Because as you said, Breitling have also got the spending power for the marketing behind it. There's no way this is going to be launched poorly or in any diluted manner. Mm-hmm. What effect do you think it's going to have on other brands, if any?
I think, I mean, the Breitling collection is quite diverse. Perhaps the closest any of the Universal watches come to us to Breitling is the sort of Premier collection for that kind of vintage look. But I think if I were Jaeger LeCoultre, I'd be worried about Universal arriving. I think that's where, assuming the pricing is similar, and I don't 100% know what the pricing is going to be on Universal, but I think they will take sales from Jaeger would be my off the top of my head guess.
Okay. That's interesting. I'm really excited to see what when they come out. And do you think it'll be a launch with impact? Will every retailer carry Universal Genève, or do you think they're going to keep it quite exclusive and selective?
I think because of the product and maybe because of the production, I don't think you need a load of points of sale. You know, I don't know, 15 to 20 in the UK maximum. Although obviously I don't know what their plans are for it, but just as an outsider, it's something that's a bit special, and I don't think you want it kind of everywhere. But that's just my opinion.
And it won't be included in the. It won't, by the sounds of things, it won't be included in Breitling boutiques, which there's a large representation in the UK because it's a different brand. So therefore, it will be
a standalone brand. Yes,
yeah. So it won't be in there, despite the fact it's under the Breitling family, effectively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's by the same management team in Switzerland. Yeah.
Yeah, something to look forward to then.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So we've got some thoughts over what's coming this year, a few trends. People in the industry. We are a really small industry, and people tend to move around a little bit, but stay within. Within what?
Yeah.
Have you seen it? Have you had any sort of interesting observations over personnel movements and the effect that might have on the brand that they've moved either from or to?
I mean, that was. Most of the moves that happened, and it was a little bit musical chairs amongst the groups, were I think in the summer last year. So the moves around happened at LVMH and Richemont. So LVMH, for those who don't know, have brands like Hublot, Zenith, Tag Heuer, Bulgari, and so there was a bit of a musical chairs thing going on within those brands. So, I mean, Ricardo Guadalupe, who was the CEO of Hublot for quite a number of years, he's now the honorary president, and the CEO role for Hublot has been taken by Julien Tonnerre, who was the CEO of Zenith. I think he did around 7 years at Zenith, and he's done a great job slimming down a kind of quite a wide catalogue of watches, many of them not particularly good sellers. So I think he's focused in on Zenith's DNA and cleaned up the collection quite a bit, and hopefully he'll do a similar job at Hublot, because, well, as you know, that Hublot collection is massive. There's every color, every size, and there's seemingly a limited edition that comes out every 5 minutes. Some of them are a little bit spurious. So, from a retailer's point of view, there's always something new with Hublot, and you haven't necessarily sold the stuff you've already got. So, that can become a problem. So, hopefully he'll bring that kind of focus and refinement to Hublot's range, because Hublot is a good brand. It's just there's so many watches. I think now
I never knew if it was if I was to look forward to that appointment at the fairs or to dread it, because the amount of watches you can't cohesively build a collection. Maybe it's the right thing. You know, who am I to say what's right or wrong? But with the quantities that come out, and I know some are market specific and some do better in some markets than others. But if there are so many if you've got more limited editions than you have in your core collection, it doesn't feel quite so limited and exclusive in my opinion. So the point on Julien moving over from Zenith, which was a slightly smaller brand, to Hublot, is it like a rite of passage? Do they cut their teeth on some of the smaller brands and then move up through?
Maybe. Sometimes it's just good to ring the changes, and obviously the senior management at LV obviously recognise Julien's a good guy. Ricardo's overseeing the growth of the brand, so maybe it's time to kind of moving on and get a fresh look at it, get a fresh look at Hublot from somebody who's done well at Zenith. And Zenith's job, Julien's job at Zenith is being taken by a chap called Benoit de Klerk, who's the former chief commercial officer at Panerai. So he's now at Zenith, or installed as Zenith CEO, And then I think Antoine Pan from Bulgaria is now the CEO of Tag Heuer. So you've got to move around, and I guess that brings a fresh perspective. Different teams, maybe different mentalities. They'll perhaps bring some of their trusted people in and kind of ring the changes. And I guess in a year when 2024 and maybe 2025 things are a little bit difficult, it's not a bad time to make those changes, because you come into something new and you've got renewed enthusiasm, and maybe that's a sort of kick up the backside. Perhaps some brands might need to engender some more enthusiasm about them and some more commerciality.
Change is not necessarily a bad thing, and because some of these brands are hundreds of years old doesn't, they've evolved because of their changes as well, not just because of their fierce loyalty to their own heritage and history. I'm slightly conscious of time, so I just want to have you got any other significant other personnel changes that you've identified?
Just quickly at Richemont, Cartier, Jaeger, IWC, all those guys, Vacheron. Louis Furler leaves Vacheron and is replaced by Laurent Purves, who was the chief commercial officer at Vacheron. Louis Furler now replaces Cyril Vigneron at Cartier. Cyril becomes the chairman of Cartier Culture and Philanthropy. Cyril, I think, was at Cartier for about 8 years, and he's a brilliant guy, and he's overseen a real uptick in Cartier's fortunes over the last sort of several years. I think he's an absolute genius. And here's the interesting one: is Jerome Lambert goes back to Jaeger LeCoultre after. Well, I think he's in some
Montblanc.
more.
He was at Montblanc. Was that right?
No, he was kind of overseeing all the watch brands, I think, at Richemont. So he's going back into the brand, and I think perhaps he oversaw Jaeger LeCoultre really growing as a brand in importance in his first time there. And Catherine Reynier, who is the CEO of Jaeger at the moment, she's gone to Van Cleef, who again, it's another Richemont brand. So those are the changes. I think they'll be interesting to see what these people do.
Yeah, it's as I think you said it correctly. It's musical chairs, but they do have an influence, which is good to see. And I'll be sad to see if there's any key changes to Cartier, purely because I've always loved the brand, but it's never necessarily been my favourite. But my favourite launch of last year was the Reflection, and which is quite unusual for me because it's a piece of jewellery, it's a bracelet that tells the time, not specifically a watch. But just as you referenced that move, I just thought, I wonder if sort of those elements. But they always work on their sort of high horology pieces and jewellery pieces separately, so it probably won't have too much. But I just wanted to get in my favourite watch from the year, albeit a wish list piece. So I want to thank you, and before I do that, what I'd like to do is a wrist review. What are you wearing?
Well, I don't know whether you can actually see that at all, but that upside down is a 1991, one of the first series Swatch chronos. It's called a Silver Star, 37 millimeters of plastic loveliness. And I say it was one of the first. Well, it was the first series Swatch chronos from it would have been about 1991, when I was significantly younger than I am now. But I don't wear it very often, but I thought I'd wear it today because it's blue and I wear blue and blue. Yeah. What about you?
Blue will never, it's never going to catch on. I promise you.
Yeah.
What about I'm loyal pretty much to my PRX. I love it. It's comfortable. It goes Fantastic. With lots of things. I don't have a vast collection, but the ones I do, I enjoy. I enjoy every watch whenever I wear it, but it's comfortable. And today is a PRX day. So so I wasn't expecting you to ask me that. So I'm asking the questions. But yeah, so that's
carbon fiber. Sorry, I would say they've just brought a carbon fiber version out, haven't they? The PRX, which looks really cool. I think
I'd buy all of them if I could. You know, they're just great watches. I love what they've done, and that's where, you know, people vote with their feet. It works.
Yep.
It's a fantastic price point. They look great. Not the whole threat thing that we were talking about, and that's not a reason to buy. But you know, sometimes we're talking about MB&F and the price point. You're not ever going to buy an MB&F at a lower price point. So you know, I quite like the fact that, you know, we work in an incredible industry, but I'm still really proud to wear a watch that's sub £1,000. You know.
Yeah.
So Mark, thank you so much for your time today. We've you know, only touched on a bit of a review of 2024. I know you had some sort of some statistics as well that we could have gone through, but we haven't had the opportunity. We talked about anniversaries. We've talked about your influence to the industry and how you've worked with brands and designed, and that's come to fruition. I think that's really important, and I love the fact that you were given the opportunity to, because people don't really know how these things come about. You know, they turn up on the shop floor, but there's so much work that goes into it, and you're one of those people that worked on a multitude of product pieces and watches that are making a lot of people really happy. We've talked about some industry moves, we've talked about trends, and that's all we have time for today. But if we can, I'd love us to chat again. There'll be more. If people want to listen to us drone on about our favourite subjects, then it would be great if we can have listeners and any suggestions that they want to listen to. You know, perhaps we can flesh that out as well. But thanks so much for your time, and I look forward to speaking to you again very, very soon.
Thank you, Faye.